everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film my March wrap-up, which it's not quite, April is not quite over. It is the 27th, no, I'm sorry, it's the 28th day of April. So, I'm squeaking in here under the wire to get this in, but I didn't want to let too much more time pass before I talked about the excellent books that I read in the second half of the month of March. So I had already talked, I did a recent reads video in the month of March where I talked about the books I finished in the first half. I've also done a review video where I talked about the BookTube prize books I read. And of course the Book Naturalist book that I read for March, I did a separate review for that. So I have talked about quite a few of the books that I read in March, but these are just a few of the ones that I didn't get a chance to talk to you about. So I read a total of 13 books in the month of March. Some fit in for reading themes. There were a lot of themes that were going on in the month of March. There always is. So we'll talk about that as we go. But let's just get into it. The very first book I want to talk about is this one, The Sleeping Car Porter by Suzette Mayr. Now, this has been, very popular on BookTube over the last year or so. My buddy read this in the middle of March with Priscilla from Evening Reader, and it was excellent book to buddy read, lot to talk about. So this is the story of a man who is a porter on a Pullman train in I think in the mid 1800s. It's after the Civil War, so like post Civil War, but also like at a time when train travel is the way that people are moving from place to place. And this takes place in Canada. And he is a black man, and he is also gay. So he has two difficult things to be dealing with in this time, in this place. So as a porter, when he is on shift, when he is working on a train, he is responsible for the passengers in his area, that has been assigned to him. So like his car that all these passengers have been assigned to him, and he's responsible for them 24/7. And so he only gets to like snatch little tiny bits of sleep throughout the time that he's on a journey. And that could be, a couple of hours of sleep, or that could be he's up for like 2 days straight with no sleep at all. In this particular story, he's on a very long cross-country train trip. And stuff happens that extends that train trip as well. And so he's very sleep deprived. And that is like, this book reads like it's a dream in a lot of places. And it's because our main character is so sleep deprived and is trying so hard to like fulfill the requirements of his job, because if he gets so many demerits, and he can get a demerit anytime a passenger complains about his service, if he gets so many demerits, he will be fired from his job, and he's trying to save up money to go to dentistry school. So this is a book about racial prejudice and the trials that black people had to endure in this time period, particularly Pullman car porters, what they had to endure, the treatment that they had to endure. It's also about him trying to come to grips with relationships that he's had in his past, the fact that, he's attracted to men and what that means for him. It's very good. It is written in a style, like I said, that you feel like you're in a dream with him. It's very almost, there isn't anything supernatural about it, but he experiences sort of things because he's so sleep deprived that makes it seem like he's experiencing supernatural things. I thought this was really well done. I don't think it was a perfect book, but I think I really enjoyed it while I was reading it, and I really enjoyed learning about the history more deeply about what Pullman car porters, what that job was like, what it entailed, and this particular period of history. So glad I read that one. The next thing I finished was an audiobook called The Furies, Women, Vengeance, and Justice by Elizabeth Flock, was the lady who wrote that one. It's nonfiction. I buddy read this one with Patrice and Rachel, and it was, first of all, I would not recommend the audiobook, not because the narration was poorly done. It wasn't. It was very well narrated in terms of the person's voice and all of that. But there are a lot of names and a lot of people, and it was really hard to keep track of at times. So this book is case studies, basically, of three different women. One woman in the southern part of the United States, a woman in India, and one was in Syria. And it's these women, these individual women, the author follows these individual women around for quite a bit of time. to learn of their stories, because they're all women who have experienced violence towards themselves in various ways and then acted, made steps to sort of not retaliate, that isn't the right word, but basically to get justice, to get vengeance on the people who harmed them. So in the case of the woman from America, her name was Brittany, she murdered a man that she said raped her in her home, but she was not able to use the self-defense laws to sort of as part of her own defense. So you learn her story. The middle story was about a woman from India who began basically a girl gang to get vengeance on men who treated women poorly. And so these groups of women would exact their own justice on men. And then the last one was a woman in Syria who joined an all-women militia, all-female militia to fight against ISIS. And that one was more very straightforward, like military-type retaliation, as opposed to more personal types of violence that the other two women got into. So the subtitle of the book and the way that it was written up in the blurb really made you think that this book was going to be one thing that I don't think it ended up being. I was very frustrated, and the three of us were very frustrated in this book by the end, because it didn't deliver on the subtitle of Women, Vengeance, and Justice, because it really wasn't about justice. Like in the end, there was really questionable outcomes for all of these women, and you really couldn't say that justice had been served in any of the cases. I expected it to be about women embracing their own power and utilizing systems or processes that would allow them to basically further themselves, like empower themselves. And that was not what happened in most of these stories. So the women were not better off at the end of the story than they were at the beginning in most cases. So that was really frustrating. And I really felt like this was another example of a book that makes you think it's one thing from the cover and the subtitle and the blurb, and turns out to be something not that when you get into the writing of it. So I found that book to be quite disappointing, and I wish it had been what I thought it was going to be, actually. And then the next one I want to talk about is, a mystery that I read, another mystery in March. So this is In Pursuit of the Proper Sinner by Elizabeth George. And this is, I can't remember if it's 10 or 11 in the Inspector Lynley series of mysteries. These are English mysteries set in, they start in like the 1990s and they continue on, and there's quite a few of them. I'm buddy reading these with Britta Bowler, and in this installment, some things have happened between Lindley and his partner Havers, which I won't go into for spoiler reasons. And so they're working a case kind of from opposite ends of the case. And it's a murder that they're trying to figure out, who done it. It's very complex. There are a lot of potential suspects in the case. There's a new character. Well, it's a character that we've been introduced to in the past, but that character sort of comes to the forefront, another police detective in this series, and he was delightful. I was really pleased to see his character get more time on the page, and we get to learn a lot more about him. I really liked the development of Havers' character in this one as well. I think, like, of all the characters, I really am the most... I'm the most attached to Havers, Barbara Havers, which is surprising to me because she was probably the least likable in the beginning of the series, but now we're 10 or 11 books in, and I'm just like, she just really, like, her character development has been so great. So I just love the way Elizabeth George writes her mysteries. They're very complex. They expect the reader to be paying attention, and she's really exploring all sides of human nature, and none of her characters are entirely good or entirely bad. Everybody is, you know, very shades of gray. Everybody has bad things about their character and good things about their character, and I just really appreciate that. I also appreciate like how she's talking about, she always talks about family relationships in each of her books, you know, parent-child, spouses, like different types of family relationships, and this one is no different, has that aspect as well. So yeah, very much enjoying that series. So that was another mystery I read. And then I have two more to talk about. I finished A Council of Dolls by Mona Susan Power. This is literary fiction that I buddy read with Sean the Book Maniac, and it is an indigenous novel, and it's told from the perspective of various women in the same family. And as each of these sections tells the story of the individual woman in the family, there's an aspect that a doll plays in it. So each of these women have either they have a childhood toy that's a doll, or they inherit a doll from another family member, but there's always a doll that gets brought into the storyline. And the stories interweave with each other because all of the women are related, and it goes back and forth in time, which I enjoyed that aspect of it, and I think that it's exploration of the injustices done to Native Americans and the harm that was done to Indigenous people who were taken from their families and put into residential schools. Like that comes through really well, you know, generational trauma and what impacts that has, not just on the individual who experienced that trauma, but on their families that are surround them, you know, their spouses, their children, how that all interacts together. I thought that was well done. Unfortunately, though, for me, the very last bit of it was told from the most modern perspective. The youngest female member of this family is telling the story. She sort of picks up the threads of the other stories that you've been told, and it kind of gets way off into woo-woo land, and the dolls become much more active participants in the storyline, and I just couldn't. It just wasn't for me at that point. And I appreciated the stories, how they tied together, but I did not like how that last bit of the story was told. So yeah, that was kind of unfortunate because up until that point, I had really been on board with the story. And so I just feel like that last bit kind of, the tone of it was quite different from the earlier sections, and like I said, it got quite woo-woo, and that's just not for me. So yeah, it was I don't want to go into it anymore because I don't want to spoil anything, but it's kind of, the book is kind of structured like interconnected short stories, and then I would just say that last bit just didn't work for me. So that was that one. And then the last thing that I finished in the month of March was the Vanderbeekers of 141st Street by Karina Glaser. And this is a middle grade book about a family who lives in a apartment in a building, and they are a large family with, you know, different, each child in the family has like very specific interests and activities that they're involved in. And so they all live together, a very close family, but they're a very loud family because they're very active, and there's a range in ages from like teenagers all the way down to like very young children. And the upstairs neighbor is the owner of the building, and he tells the family that they have to leave after Christmas. So they have like a month to like find a new place to live and move out of this apartment building where they've all lived. And even the parents have lived in this neighborhood. I think the dad had lived in the neighborhood when he was a child. They have very close connections with their neighbors. Like, they love living in this apartment. They love their neighborhood. They love where they live. And this man who thinks that they're too loud and too boisterous and too annoying is just like, you've got to go. And so the children come up with some ideas for how they can convince this man to let them stay in the apartment. It is very funny. The kids' characters are very well drawn. The parents are very good as well. I thought it was very charming. I read it all in its entirety on a plane ride from Maine to Florida at the end of March. I wanted to participate in middle grade March, and this was the only one that I got in for the month. But I think it's really delightful, and it's a series, evidently. So I'm going to try to find the rest of the books in that series and read through them, because I think that the family is really fun and really charming. And I liked their exploration of like what makes a family and what makes a community. I think that was really strong aspect of the book, and I really enjoyed my time spent with it. So that was the last thing that I completed. So just to sort of summarize, I did say that I was able to read some books for different themes in the month of March. So I read 2 books that would fit for a Women's History Month, and that was, I read A Free-Spirited Woman by Gladys Langford. I read that at the beginning of the month, and that was the diaries of a woman who lived in pre-World War II Great Britain in London. So that fits. And then I read The Furies by Elizabeth Flock, which also fits. So 2 books for Women's History Month. I read The Vanderbeekers for middle grade March, as I said, and then 2 books for March Mystery Madness. I read Heartstone by C.J. Sansom at the beginning of the month, historical mystery series, and then In Pursuit of the Proper Sinner by Elizabeth George at the second half of the month. So 2 mysteries. I did not get to my Irish book for Irish Readathon, which I'm very sad about. I did not get to a Welsh book for Dowie-thon, which also makes me sad. But, that's not to say I can't read those types of books later on in the year. I just was not able to get to them in the month of March. So that's it. That's my wrap up for March. I will be back with another video, and hopefully it will not take me quite as long to wrap up April reading after April is done. I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read. I will talk to you later.